Hello and welcome to Dialogue. China has identified innovative capability as the key to high-quality development in the following years, if not decades. Thus, increasing the level of innovation in Chinese firms is a key priority for its long-term plans. Recent surveys across the world have indicated that only a few executives are satisfied with their firm's innovation performance. So what are the driving forces of being innovative in China? How might an increasingly fragmented world affect innovation at the company level? To discuss this and more, I'm glad to be joined by Carl Fey, Professor of Strategy at the BI Norwegian Business School in Oslo, Norway, and former Dean of Nottingham University Business School, China, and Joseph Smith, Senior Vice President of Consulting at Best Consulting and the former Vice President of Global Transformation at Huawei. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, Carl, I will start with you. Give us a general idea, the big picture. How do you compare the Chinese firms with their overseas counterpart in terms of being innovative?
Well, thanks for having me here today and focusing on this important topic of innovation. Indeed, it's critical for Chinese companies today. China, as you know, is now focusing on high growth. And while innovation has not been the main focus historically for China and Chinese companies, it now is a big focus. Now, if we look at the Global Innovation Index, China ranked 11th in the world, up about quite a bit from a decade ago when they were 35th. Chinese companies, though, probably are still known more for their efficiency and their lower prices than their innovation, but I'm sure this is going to continue to improve. There is some scope for improvement, though. For example, we see that only 2 companies are in Clarivariat's top 100 global innovators in terms of companies. That's Huawei and BOE. And also, we can have some hope that China is going to do even better and better in innovation, because we now see that China is actually filing more patents than any other country in the world, almost 700,000 in the last year, compared to second place, the US, with 600,000.
So can we say that they are placing more and more importance on innovation?
China is placing much more focus on innovation, and I think we're going to see a lot more happening. But I would point out that I think one thing we need to do in China is start earlier changing the mindset. I think one of the greatest problems is the early age education for 1st through 12th grade and even in universities. There's such a focus in China on how much you can memorize, how much you can have in your head. And now with the internet, and especially with AI, we don't need to know how much we can have in our head. We need to understand how to think creatively, how to solve problems. This is what adds value. And this, I think, is what's really important and something that could be further improved in China.
Mm-hmm. So Joseph, you have been in China in decades. So what's your observation? What are the strengths of the Chinese cultural education that probably help, facilitate innovation? But at the same time, obviously, there are problems.
Yeah, right. So I came to China in 1999, and I was the first foreigner to live and work with Huawei. And I've worked with them ever since on their transformation and on their innovation. And so it's interesting that, Huawei and only one other company is in that top list of innovators. So I have a rather unique perspective, having worked in Huawei for such a long time. I think the biggest changes over the last 2 decades have really been going from, as Carl said, just a kind of a provider of slightly cheaper products and focused on efficiency, but becoming more focused on innovation. So even if you look at Huawei back in 1999, that was the era of 2G. And so Huawei was really just catching up, you would say, even though it was an innovative company. But you fast forward 20 years and you see that, Huawei is the global innovator of all of 5G. And it's done that by investing in its innovation systems consistently every single year. And so, to put it very simply, they've taken innovation very seriously from an investment perspective. And I think that's one of the core reasons why they've been so innovative. And I think that's the lesson that other Chinese companies can learn.
Joseph, you mentioned R&D, research and development, the investment in this sector. Huawei is known for its, I would say, a big share of its revenue basically to put into this R&D sector. What about the other Chinese companies? Do you think they realize, do you think there's enough awareness? They need to invest probably a large share of their revenue into R&D?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite unique to see any company, whether it's a Chinese company or Western company, spending that amount of money on R&D. So basically, Huawei would spend between 10% and 15% of its revenue, which is more than it would make in profit, on R&D every year. And so that's actually a huge amount to spend on R&D. It puts Huawei within the top 3 companies in the world as a percentage of investment in R&D. And so we haven't seen that so much with other Chinese companies. But I think, I think it would be good for Chinese companies to maybe not invest as much as Huawei does, but certainly consider spending more on innovation.
Joseph, you mentioned Huawei. Obviously, Huawei played a very important role in terms of 5G technologies. That helped the country's development to a great deal. So, how do you think, if you look back over the past 1 or 2 decades, how do you think the Chinese companies, innovation capability or their competitiveness help China grow globally?
Well, I think it's been that classic growth curve where it just curves upward, and the rate of acceleration actually increases. And I think with the deployment of 5G and cloud technologies and apps and the AI, which is becoming very practical for most people to use now, I think that all of those factors will accelerate just innovation in general. And the Chinese, generally, the Chinese companies that we work with, they're very keen to engage in these new technologies and work out how they can use all of that to innovate, whether it's, controlling a crane remotely from 100 miles away, or whether it's just using AI creatively on a desktop. So I think we're going to see a compounding of technologies, which will just see a natural innovation growth.
It's like how Chinese companies are very good at, or better at, applying whatever technology into the real life. For example, as Joseph mentioned about using 5G to control a crane, or mining, for example. So that seems like in China there's a lot of use of that, and a lot of development there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that is maybe where China has been stronger. But I think moving forward, the real thing is, how can China do the real innovations? And in fact, maybe I could share with you that I've recently completed a study involving about 200 companies in China and looking at what management practices drive innovation. And we find that there are some things that companies can do in China. And this is important because most companies want to be innovative, but most struggle with it. A recent McKinsey survey found that actually only about 1 in 10 executives are satisfied with innovation, but almost everyone considers it among their top 3 goals. So some of the things that our study found that are important are, for example, to focus on the acquisition and development and management of knowledge. This was the most important thing we found. We also found the importance of resolving different tensions, which I can talk about more later. And let me give you a few examples of this. So, for example, there's a company you're probably familiar with called Great Wall. Great Wall, car manufacturer.
The auto,
yeah. And they realized that one of the challenges they had is that there was great flow of information from the top managers down inside of one functional area like marketing,
right,
but not so good horizontal flow, like from marketing to engineering to sales. And so they decided they would co-locate people in cross-functional teams based on the model. So all of the people working on one model of car, you would have a marketing person next to an engineering person, next to someone from HR. And this way you have more informal, just natural flow of information. But they also did some formal things, like they have what they call Happy Saturdays, where they will choose a theme and have people from different departments present what they think is important for others to know about this that they've recently learned. And they also are trying to do things to be quick. In China, speed is really important, right?
So speed.
Exactly. They use Ding Talk. They have a corporate Ding Talk channel where you can give your ideas just instantly if you have it today and you think it needs action immediately. And this is important to have things like this. But one of the things that's most important is maybe today you learn something. But the question is, how can you make sure that everyone at CGTN learns this, not just you?
Right.
And so the thing that our research shows that's most important is you need to do this external sourcing, looking around the world. You need to do this internal development, like spending a lot on your R&D. But more importantly, once you get that knowledge, you need to make sure it's not just you who have that knowledge, but your whole company that has that knowledge. So that's one thing that I think companies really need to work on. A second example is the company Fortile, based in Ningbo, where I used to live. They're making these fans that you have over your...
in the kitchen?
In the kitchen, right, over the stove. And they have expanded a little bit into some other products. For example, dishwashers. When they wanted to expand, they looked around the kitchen, since they work in kitchens, and they realized people don't sell many dishwashers in China, actually. They said, well, why not? Maybe we could do this. And they realized that, like in the US where I'm from, we maybe cook twice a week and then make a lot of food and put it in the refrigerator and just warm it up, and we maybe wash the dishes twice a week. But in China, you cook every day and wash the dishes every day. So these huge dishwashers, they weren't very useful in China. So they said, we need a smaller dishwasher. And so they decided to create two teams. One team that would look at the existing dishwashers and figure out how to make a smaller one. And another team that would think totally out of the box and try to figure out how could we do something totally different. And in the end, the second team sort of won as having the better design. But what they did was they said, okay, we still need to take some people from that losing team and put them in the winning team to capture their ideas, because they have some good ideas about how to save water. So you can sometimes say there are three things that are important. One is what I call innovative abrasion. Having these two teams, it created some tension, some competition, not just everyone thinking the same. That's important for innovation. Second, you need innovative agility. That's the ability to adapt quickly, pulling together the different people, having the different ideas. This is innovative agility. And thirdly, you need innovative resolution. That was this ability to pull people from one team into the other team so everyone feels like I'm a winner. One of the big challenges in innovation is that people should be willing to take risks. And often in China, you're highly punished for failure. So you have to create this culture that taking risk is okay. What's not okay is not taking the risk, but taking a responsible risk and it not turning out so well, this is okay. Lots of experimentation is critical. So these are a couple examples that we find from our research that can help Chinese companies to be more innovative.
Well, Carl, you are talking about the management, right? Management plays a very important role in driving innovation at the company level, and also the enterprise culture. The culture exists in particular individual enterprises. That's also important.
Yes, it is. The culture is really important. And tying in with this part of culture is sort of how hierarchical a company is. We can see some companies like ByteDance really working to try to make things a lot flatter here, trying to have people call not with such formal titles and just being able to approach anyone. And we see companies like VIP Kid trying to also create a flatter culture, but also being sensitive to Chinese culture, which I think is very important.
Let's have a short break. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back. Joseph, you mentioned about Huawei operating in more than 170 countries. And of course, in the company, you have people like you from other places and Chinese employees. So people would say, oh, there's a challenge for people to get integrated in terms of bringing different cultures and working together smoothly, rather than, oh, that's a driving force for innovation. How does Huawei do it probably to take advantage of the, let's say, diversity of their employees, diversity of different cultures, and then probably make them into the force for innovation?
Right. Well, to be completely honest with you, it's been a tough journey for Huawei. You know, in the early days when Huawei was setting up its first offices internationally, in many places, it felt like there were maybe two teams, the Chinese team and the international or the local team. But gradually over the years, that internationalism has become part of the culture. And so what happens is Chinese people will go overseas, they'll spend maybe 4 or even 8 years there, and it will change them in terms of how they think about culture. You know, they might be posted to France and get an appreciation of French culture, for example. But then equally, the local employees, you know, they'll learn about their Chinese colleague. And so it's this constant ongoing exchange, which is not always easy, but I think the best way to look at it is from a sort of curious, interesting cultural exchange, and something that should be kind of fun and enjoyed. You know, we should kind of celebrate the differences and enjoy those differences, at least in my view. And so for Huawei, that's been quite a journey over the last 20 years. And continuing, but it's become part of the company now, and I believe it's one of the key success factors. So, you know, Huawei have the world's best mathematicians operating in a lab in Russia. They'll have the world's best radio experts operating in a lab in Italy. Then they'll also have a huge R&D operation back here in China. And so it's this blending together that actually seems to contribute to the success.
Yeah, the success of the company. So Carl, obviously, the Huawei, you know, if you speak of their success in being innovative, there are different drivers, different sectors. But what experience do you think Huawei might share with its Chinese companies, so they can learn, they can copy probably, they can also introduce this kind of factor into their own company, into their own management to become more innovative?
So I think there are a couple of things that are important. I think the most important thing that Huawei has done a great job of is being very humble and saying, we want to learn. Even when they've gotten quite good, they say, we want to learn from you. This is really critical. The biggest hamper to innovation is believing that you know the way to do it. It's only one way. That's right. And you know, bringing in different consultants and consulting companies from around the world has been a great thing that they've done. A second thing they've done is, one of the findings of our research is that it's very important to deal with resolving some key tensions. You need to listen to what customers have in terms of ideas, but you also need to develop the greatest, newest technologies internally. You need to have this external sourcing and also internal development of things. You need to have rules to keep a large company working right, but you also need to have an ability to step outside that rule and make an exception to be very quickly reactive. So there are a lot of these different tensions that you need to resolve. And we find that many companies, they try to choose one end or the other end of that tension. But we find it's better to pursue both ends at the same time. This is a little bit this yin-yang approach in China. And actually, we find in our study, we have looked at both companies in the Nordic countries and companies in China. And we find that Chinese companies, they're much better at dealing with both ends of a tension at the same time than their Nordic counterparts. And you know, you can see this if you ask an American, should you do A or should you do B? They'll say, oh, B for sure. You ask a Chinese person, their answer will be something like, oh, well, A really is quite good, but B has also some advantages, and we could maybe try to combine these a little bit. You rarely get only A, yes? And so this culture is actually a benefit, I think, for innovation. And when we talk about Huawei, we can see that they're following this approach also. You know, Huawei is often known as a wolf culture, but it's also often known as a turtle culture. So this wolf culture, it's sort of aggressive, it's fast, it's having a good sense of smell to pay attention to the customer. Mm-hmm. But the turtle culture, it's going step by step to the long-term goals and not changing those goals. It's also being patient, not to just jump and quickly make a strategic decision, but to wait till the right moment to make the right strategic decision and to pursue that. And some long-term goals that Huawei has already kept, They're things like being humble. They're things like taking these best practices from consultants, bringing them into the company and applying them just as they were in the other country, and then working to adapt them. Not just trying to adapt them first. First getting it right, then adapting it to the local conditions. But a local adaptation is important. It's things like valuing people. There's nothing more important than the human capital, the people working in the company. And Huawei has done a great job of retaining people for a long time. That really helps. So I think these are a number of things that other companies can learn from the experience of Huawei.
Yeah, very valuable experience, you know, given this 10 2 or 3 decades rapid development. Obviously, there's an accumulation of management, you know, of what works or what probably not works for a lot of companies, so they can learn from the successful companies like Huawei, like you know, other companies mentioned, ByteDance, VIPKs, for example. What are the areas do you think, you know, the Chinese companies are probably poised to be you know, enjoy more development in terms of innovation? What do we see now? You mentioned the you know, Great Wall, the auto company, you know, electric companies, for example. The Chinese companies are leading in the world, you know, batteries, etc. They are very innovative in the sense too.
Yeah, so I think that we're going to see China moving from being the factory of the world to the innovative factory of the world. And already we see China is leading in electronic vehicles. We see China leading in high-speed trains like CRRC. We see China doing a great job in this sort of internet-based companies like Alibaba and Tencent. We see China doing quite good in companies like white goods, like Haier, which, you know, has become so innovative and so efficient that it basically put GE out of business, so they had to acquire the GE white goods division. And Haier is interesting because they have not only been good in technological innovation, but also in management innovation. You know, they have about 4,000 micro enterprises. Joseph mentioned a little while ago about the challenges when you become a large company. It is a challenge to continue to be innovative like a small little company. So what Haier has done is they have broken it down into these small little micro enterprises so that people can make many decisions quickly. And then they have this support infrastructure of things like HR and manufacturing to support those micro enterprises. So we even see China innovating in management innovation, not only in the technological innovation.
Joseph, I wonder, you know, if you agree with Carl in terms of the next stage for the Chinese, you know, companies' innovation?
Absolutely. I think that Chinese innovation will just continue to grow at an expanding rate. I think the only area, frankly, where China is behind at the moment is with chip design and manufacture. And this has become a problem because of the American restrictions. But ironically, I think that this will boost the development of Chinese chip manufacture and self-reliance in terms of chips. And so I think that, ironically, the one area where China is behind is probably going to be the fastest developing area going forward, simply because in the past, most chip strategy, including for Huawei, is based on Moore's law. So it's based on chips getting smaller and cheaper and faster. And that's been a good strategy to rely on. You know, it means products can get better every single year because the chips get better. But there's been a whole bunch of areas of research like analog computing, different computing architectures, and different theories of computing, which really haven't been explored for, you know, maybe since the 60s or 70s. And so there's been a lack of innovation in chips simply because everyone was relying on Moore's law. And so I think where we're going to see new innovations coming from China is in the type of computers that are being made, especially with the backdrop of AI supporting that.
Yeah, Carl, Joseph mentioned the chips. We talked about Huawei. Obviously, there's a geopolitical factor, competition. Obviously, Washington with Beijing. So there are restrictions or bans on the export of advanced chips to China. But overall, what kind of role do you think this geopolitical competition play in terms of probably Chinese companies' ability to innovate?
So I think Joseph's right that the American ban on high-end chips has pushed forward innovation in China in the short term. But in the long term, I think we need to collaborate more. And I hope that the U.S. will return to its traditional stance of trying to encourage free trade and openness. If I get sick and I need treatment for cancer, I don't really care if it's Chinese or American. I just want the treatment.
Exactly.
And it's not efficient for China to develop a treatment and for the U.S. to develop a treatment. We just need to collaborate together to develop the treatment. I am hopeful that the U.S. may change a little bit. I don't think it will change quickly in its policy, and I'm sad being American about its policy. But we've seen recently like some policy talks from Janet Yellen and others that seem to be a little bit of a softening, which is encouraging. So let's hope that'll happen. Also, you and I, we've been talking mostly virtually in recent months. Now we're able to meet in person. And I hope that this, for many people, meeting in person will ease tensions a little bit. But when it comes to chips, it's really ironic. Even you look at the 5 largest producers of chips globally, you see that they're all importing chips from each other. It's not so simple like U.S. is leader in chips. In fact, U.S. is leader in high-end chips. China is leader in low-end chips. And the U.S. is importing a lot of chips from China. Also, to make these high-end chips, the U.S. needs rare earth metals, which China has over 95% of the world's supply of, and is importing all these rare earth metals from China. So it's an integrated world, and we become very inefficient when we try to stop it. The famous Harvard professor Michael Porter, he says there's not one best technology in industry to be in. There is a best industry given the unique characteristics that your country has. So China needs to do certain things, US needs to do certain things, and we need to specialize and collaborate together. Finally, how to solve this? I think one of the things we can do is we can focus on some things we can agree on, like working together on green innovation. I was so happy to see that China now in the Belt and Road Initiative has also the Green Belt and Road Initiative, trying to expand also in a sustainable way. This maybe is something that the US and China can get together, collaborate on as a first step. Then when we're working with that, we can hopefully expand into other areas.
Right. Final words also on this geopolitical factor in terms of innovation. Joseph?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real shame, to be honest with you, because, working with Huawei, we've been building a global supply chain for a quarter of a century. So that includes customers, suppliers, logistics, people. And so it's a real shame to see politics, geopolitics have an effect on, businesses which are just like Huawei, which are running successfully and helping every single country that they're in to develop their communications, which ultimately helps the country and the economy. So, from my perspective, Huawei is a global force for good in terms of helping humanity with communications technology. So it's a real shame to see the geopolitics kick in. But I think I'm probably less optimistic than Carl. I think we may have seen a sort of permanent shift where America has its own chip strategy. Europe has its own chip strategy now to be independent. China is building its chip capacity. And so I think in spite of our efforts to build internationally integrated supply chains, I think that this will persist for some time, this lack of trust. And unfortunately, it does seem to come almost exclusively from America, which again is unfortunate because America has great companies and great people, and it's a shame.
Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Xingduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.